Pour yourself a drink right now. Beer, wine, whiskey, whatever's in your hand. Look at it. Really look at it, because that drink is older than the glass it came in. Older than the recipe that made it. Older, in fact, than your entire species. Your relationship with alcohol didn't begin at a party. It didn't begin with the first brewery or the first vineyard. It began on a forest floor in Africa, roughly 10 million years ago, with a small primate who picked up a piece of fruit that had been sitting in the sun too long, and what happened next may have built the entire modern world. Here's what nobody tells you: the fruit was rotten. Not spoiled the way we think of spoiled today, dangerous, to be avoided, just overripe, warm, sitting on the ground beneath the tree it had fallen from. Natural yeast had gotten inside it, the sugars were breaking down, tiny amounts of ethanol were forming in the pulp. When that primate ate the fruit, something happened in its brain, a signal, a warmth. Not dramatic, not what you'd call drunk, but something that felt unmistakably good for reasons it couldn't explain, so it kept coming back. Day after day, it sought out the fruit that smelled a little off, the fruit that had been on the ground longest, and over millions of years, that preference didn't fade, it got stronger. In 2014, a biologist at UC Berkeley named Robert Dudley published a theory called the drunken monkey hypothesis. His argument: our primate ancestors didn't just tolerate fermented fruit, they evolved to seek it out. Because the ethanol in overripe fruit acted as a signal. This is the most calorie-dense food nearby. Follow the smell. By the time your species arrived roughly 300,000 years ago, the preference was already hardwired. You didn't inherit a taste for alcohol. You inherited a nervous system that had been chasing fermentation for 10 million years. The craving was there long before anyone figured out how to make it on purpose. The question is, when did they figure that out? In 2018, archaeologists were excavating a cave near Haifa, Israel. The cave is called Rakafet. It was used by a people called the Natufians, roughly 13,000 years ago. Inside the cave, they found stone mortars carved directly into the bedrock, not portable tools, permanent fixtures cut into the floor of the cave itself. When they analyzed the residue left in those mortars, they found traces of wheat and barley, soaked, germinated, left to ferment. That is beer, brewed in a cave, 13,000 years ago. But here's what makes that discovery rewrite everything. The Natufians were not farmers. They hadn't invented agriculture yet. They were still hunting animals and collecting wild grain by hand. They didn't grow the barley. They found it, carried it to the cave, and then, before doing almost anything else with it, they made it into alcohol. Brewing came before farming. The drink came before the field. And then, about 1,000 years later, someone in southeastern Turkey built something the world had never seen before. Göbekli Tepe, massive stone pillars, some weighing over 10 tons, arranged in precise circles and carved with detailed images of animals, eagles, foxes, scorpions, cut with tools made of stone, built before pottery, before farming, before anyone in the region had a permanent home. The people who built this were still nomadic hunter-gatherers. For years, no one could explain it. What would make nomadic people coordinate the labor to drag 10-ton stones up a hill and carve them with precision? What would bring them together like that? Then archaeologists found large stone vats buried at the site. When they tested the residue inside, they found chemical traces of fermented grain. Large quantities, enough for mass gatherings. The current theory is that Göbekli Tepe wasn't a home. It was a meeting place, a ritual ground. People traveled from across the region, came together under those carved pillars, and drank. Alcohol didn't come after civilization. It may be the reason people gathered in large enough groups to build it. By 7000 BCE, the evidence gets more precise. In a Neolithic village called Jiahu in central China, archaeologists found pottery jars, some of the oldest ceramic vessels ever discovered. When they analyzed the residue inside, they found something unexpected. A fermented drink made from rice, honey, grapes, and hawthorn berries. Chemically confirmed. The oldest known recipe for alcohol anywhere on Earth, and it wasn't crude, it was a blend. Multiple ingredients deliberately chosen and combined in specific ratios. Whoever made this knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't accident, this was craft. From there, it only grew. By the time ancient Egypt came around, beer wasn't something people made for celebration. It was woven into the structure of civilization itself. Workers who built the pyramids were paid in beer, 4 to 5 liters a day. That was their salary, not coins, not grain. Beer, and it made sense. Water from the Nile was often contaminated. The brewing process killed the bacteria. Beer was safer to drink than water. It kept people alive in ways that plain water couldn't. On top of that, fermentation added calories and B vitamins. For a laborer dragging limestone blocks across the desert, that mattered. Beer wasn't just a drink, it was lunch. The Egyptians believed beer was created by Osiris and given to humans as a gift. It appeared in temple offerings, burial rituals, medical prescriptions. Doctors mixed herbs into beer and prescribed it for infections, stomach pain, difficult childbirth. One single drink was doing the job of a paycheck, a water filter, a meal, a medicine, and a prayer, all from the same cup. But the story doesn't end in Egypt. It expands, because every civilization that rises leaves behind the same evidence. Sumerians in Mesopotamia had over 20 words for different types of beer. They wrote the first known recipe for it on a clay tablet. It wasn't a footnote, it was important enough to write down and preserve for thousands of years. The ancient Greeks had Dionysus, an entire god, dedicated to wine and the altered states it creates. The Romans spread viticulture across a continent as they conquered it. Where Rome went, vineyards followed. In medieval Europe, monasteries became the primary brewers. Monks refined techniques, developed new recipes, and distributed beer to pilgrims and the sick. The church and the brewery were often the same building, across every continent, across every era of recorded history, in cultures with no contact with each other, the same pattern. Fermentation discovered, refined, elevated, made sacred, not because humans couldn't stop, but because something that old doesn't feel like a habit, it feels like home. Here's the full picture. 10 million years ago, your primate ancestors were drawn to fermented fruit because the ethanol signaled calories. They didn't choose to crave it. Evolution chose for them. 13,000 years ago, humans were deliberately brewing in caves before they knew how to farm. The drink came before the field. 12,000 years ago, they may have built the first monumental structure in human history, not to worship a god, not to mark a grave, but to have a place to drink together. 9,000 years ago, they had recipes, refined ones, with multiple ingredients and deliberate ratios. 5,000 years ago, entire civilizations were running on it, paying workers with it, praying with it, healing with it. Alcohol didn't arrive after we built civilization. There's a serious argument, made by serious archaeologists, that it's part of why we built it at all. Go back to that drink in front of you. The glass is modern, the recipe is recent, but the impulse behind it, that pull toward fermentation, that sense that something warm and slightly altered is where other people will be, that is 10 million years old. It lived in a small primate reaching for overripe fruit on a forest floor before your species had a name for itself. The process changed. The ingredients improved. The cups got fancier. But the thing that made you reach for it tonight is the same thing that made them build temples, pay workers, write recipes in stone, and gather under carved pillars at the edge of the ancient world. You didn't invent drinking. You inherited it. From every human who ever sat around a fire and passed something warm to the person next to them. We just learned how to make it on purpose.